Namaste. So we're going to be giving some teachings on why the modern practice that is being done is not the same as what traditionally was called yoga, and why it doesn't have the same benefits as the ancient practice of yoga. There are many traditional sources on the practice of yoga, and many people are studying these, like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Hatha Yoga, Pradipika. They give a description of yoga that's very different from the modern practice that's being done. Now people are focused a lot on one step in the process described by Patanjali. In Yoga Sutras, Patanjali lays out 8 different practices, successive practices that are done after defining the practice of yoga, what it is. This is the system of Ashtanga Yoga, 8-limbed practice. And these different steps are yama, or restraints, certain things that the yogi should not be doing. Niyama, or observances. And then asana. And Patanjali doesn't say much on the practice of asana. That's one distinction that we must make. Then now the practice is very focused on asana. They don't do any of the other steps. They just do the asana practice. Maybe little pranayama, maybe little meditation, but they're skipping those first 2 steps. It's interesting. It's a very different practice. But when Patanjali talks about asanam, Patanjali says, sit in a comfortable position. And that's about all that he has to say about asana. And that's what was taught by the early yoga teachers in the earlier times, the great teachers like Swami Vivekananda. Vivekananda didn't do any asana practice. He could do a couple of sitting poses very well. And even in Hatha Yoga Pradipika, only 15 or so asanas are listed by name, and most of those are sitting poses. But then 4 of those are said to be extremely important, the others not so important. And those are all sitting poses, like Padmasana, lotus pose, siddhasana, the accomplished pose, different poses like these, which are sitting poses for meditation, so you can do the rest of the steps of yoga. After asana, then there's pranayama. Asana gets the body in shape that it can sit without distraction. And pranayama helps get the mind in shape so that the mind is not a distraction to the higher practices in yoga. And then we have pratyahara, or the withdrawal of the senses. We stop experiencing through the 5 senses so we can have an inward experience. And then there's dharana, concentration, dhyanam, meditation, and samadhi, or union. So Patanjali defines yoga very simply. He says yoga is the process of restraining the natural instinct of the mind, not restraining the thoughts, not restraining the feelings. That's what the instinct of the mind does. It says this thought is bad, this thought is good. It's a concept in the human mind. Concept in some of the more modern religions as well, that there's some good and evil. In yoga, there's no good, there's no evil. Everything's good. It's as good or as bad as the mind makes it. So in yoga, we retrain the mind to not judge these things, not judge the feelings, not judge the thoughts and experiences. We retrain the mind to be at a state of peace, and we rise above those experiences. Patanjali says otherwise. This stuff in our mind, we assume the form of it. If a person represses anger, they'll become an angry person. They'll see the world as a violent and fearful place. If a person has a lot of fear, they repress it, they'll become a very anxious person. They'll find reason to be afraid of everything. If they repress the sadness, they'll become a depressed sort of person. And they'll just see the things that are sad around them in the world. They won't see things that are beautiful. However, we see the world as a reflection of our own inner state. And so if you see a person who's very angry, maybe angry about politics, angry about gender, angry about race and racism, and I don't mean any of these things, we should not work to find peace in the world, but people are getting so angry about issues, angry about politics, angry about who the president is. I see it on social media. People are getting so upset now, and all we really learn, we don't learn about how the world is from these views expressed by angry people. We learn about their own inner state. They're revealing their inner state by this. This is some of the mystical awareness of yoga, but we're not practicing yoga that way. We're leaving out the first steps. We're leaving out the higher practices of yoga. Japa is one of the highest practices of yoga, the repetition of a mantra. Even when people are practicing mantras now, they're turning it into something else. There's also, they talk about different paths of yoga in the sense of there's the bhakti yoga, the karma yoga, raja yoga, and jnana yoga. My guru, who is in the lineage of Patanjali, described these as successive steps as well. He'd say people start with the karma yoga. They have to do service in the world, so they develop love for everyone, everything. Then they do bhakti yoga, so they can start to get a little experience of the divine and have love for the divine. From this practice, then they get enough faith, enough courage, they can persist in the other practices. Then they do Raja Yoga, the higher practices of yoga, including japa, repetition of mantra. And then the Jnana Yoga, from all these other practices, they start to get the divine experience. Jnana means wisdom, but it's not like we think of wisdom or knowledge. It's not like this where we read a book and we get some knowledge of a subject. It's the opposite. We take away the preconceived notions, the thoughts in the mind, the preferences, the beliefs. We can start to have a direct experience. And jnana is really this experiential knowledge. You could read many books about music, but it would be different to hear that music even just one time. You get a much better understanding and experience from that. And it's similar with the spiritual things. So yoga was a spiritual practice. Now it's a practice for health, for healing. It's a materialistic practice. Used to be an inward practice. Now it's an outward practice. Hatha yoga pradipika says that when yoga is done publicly, the benefits are nothing. When yoga is done secretly, when the knowledge that you get from yoga is kept a secret, then you make progress, you make steady progress in this way. It indicates it's a very inward process. We can't be worried about what others around us think. So it's become very different. There's a clothing for yoga, there's accessories you have to buy for yoga. If you want to practice yoga, you have to have all kind of expensive props and tools and clothings and all these things. It's not the traditional way. Traditionally, the yogi would live in a little hut and stay there and just stay away from society, not caring what anyone else would think. And solitude and isolation was thought to be very important in the practice of yoga, because everyone in the world now is going in the instinctive ways of the mind. We're retraining ourselves through the practice of yoga to go against the instinct of the mind. And if you're around people in society, even looking at them on the social media is going to engage this instinctive mind, and we start to come to the obstacles in the path of yoga by this association with people. Better to stay alone. The practice is inward. You have to do it alone. And so we're going to be talking in the coming weeks in our Sangha online about the 20 yamas and niyamas, these preliminary practices of yoga. Without doing these, it's not really yoga. We can do all the other higher practices, but the instinct of the mind is going to be too strong. And this is why we see when the priest in the temple is doing japa, he's not chanting nicely, not chanting clearly, chanting quickly. And maybe the people are putting pressure on the priest too. I don't want to put all the fault on the priesthood. People maybe say, oh, we Panditji, we don't have 6 hours, we don't have 8 hours, we don't have 10 hours to do these rituals. We just have 30 minutes. Can you finish in 30 minutes? And so, of course, the priest, Om Namah Shivaya, 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 until it becomes something, not even the mantra that's being said. But sometimes, I think it seems that the energy starts to build up. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. And I see it's as if the priest is running away. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. Please don't get me, don't do. Because the instinct of the mind is against every step in the process of yoga. We instinctively run away. Or then when the lay people are doing it, then they do this practice. They turn the higher practice of japa yoga into the lower practice of bhakti yoga. And maybe they need to do that practice. I don't mean to say it's a bad thing. Maybe they don't have enough faith to sit there and persist. They don't have the courage yet, so they need that higher japa yoga practice to turn into the preparatory practice of bhakti yoga, and they turn it into a song. Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Om Namah. And people singing, dancing. It becomes an outward practice. What was a very inward practice becomes an outward practice, a distraction from the true meditation. The japa meditation that leads us to the inner awareness. We've got to chant clearly. We've got to chant mindfully. It's very dull, it's very boring, my guru used to say. He said it's supposed to be very dull, very boring, because it leads you inward. It makes you still. It starts to still the mind, so you become still enough. You see what is there right before you to be seen. Realization is there with us. We just turn away in every instant is the problem. But when we do any of these practices of yoga, without the preparatory steps of yama and niyama, it's like trying to carry water in a bucket with a hole in it. Every benefit is going to leak right out. And so we can do mantra and get uplifted a little bit. We come to happiness, come to peace, come to bliss. We look at Facebook for 5 minutes and we lose it. Of course, yamas would say, don't look at Facebook. First, there's several reasons, which we'll go into in these talks that we'll be giving. So join us in the Sangha. Every week we're due on Wednesday night in the USA East Coast time, 7 p.m. We broadcast live. And then after that, we'll keep the broadcast up so people can watch it at any time. If you're in India and sleeping at 7 p.m. USA time, then you can watch whenever you can watch. And we'll be, in the coming weeks, in the next 20 weeks, we'll address those 10. So please join us for the Sangha. Join us for the Patreon, on Patreon for even more teachings. We're needing the support of people, and so we're giving some extra teachings to the people who can join. And you can join just for a little bit of money. You don't have to pay a lot. It gives you access to a lot of basic additional teachings there, additional videos and information and teachings to help expand your spiritual practice. And it helps us because for the first time now, this month is the first month we are paying all the bills at the property we bought for the temple. Those who had committed when we bought the place to be contributing financially, everyone has stopped contributing. So now we're dependent upon the contributions of other people, and we have quite a few have blessed us and committed to help every month through the Patreon. And so join us there, join us for the Sangha, and learn more about how to really deepen your practice of yoga. Learn about the traditional practice of yoga. Om Namah Shivaya.